Okay, so at this point, I would like to provide a synthesis of the presentations this morning and also the discussions we had in the two panel sessions. So I think I'd like to use the acronym TRIPS, T-R-I-P-S, to highlight the salient points that we all learned from today. Well, the first is T, which can actually stand for a number of things, but in this case, I'd like to mention two. First is target. So in the various presentations, it was highlighted that vision is very important for even initial tourism growth and development, or even for renewal, coming, let's say, from a period of stagnation to a period of recovery. So their target is very important. But more than the target is the trajectory. There has to be like a timeline. Okay, when do we aim to achieve this vision? Is it destination as presented, for example, for some of the cities, destination 2030. Singapore is planning actually 50 years in advance. Iloilo now is implementing a new program called Wheels of the City because it's going to emphasize more on destination infrastructure. So what would be all these timelines for all the cities that we have in the country? If all of the cities, how many do we have? More than 140 cities in the Philippine archipelago. What if all of them actually invest for urban tourism? So what are the targets, and what is really the trajectory? Because the trajectory could actually lead to either growth or even stagnation and decline. So that's very crucial. R for resiliency. That's emphasized across all the presentations. We need to be able to recover. We need to be able to bounce back. And there are very critical elements in order to achieve resiliency. And I would like to mention these two critical elements with the use of the third letter, which is I. The first is institutions. According to Douglas North, the Nobel Prize winner for economics, institutions actually make markets more efficient. They lower monitoring costs. They lower transaction costs. In other words, it's not always the case that free markets work perfectly. Okay, there will always be what we call failures. There could always be setbacks. So institutions are very crucial. And institutions create what we call the system of the next I, which is incentives. Incentives actually shape behavior of people because incentives simply define what we call the rules of the game. Earlier, Ms. Lee mentioned about incentives provided, let's say, to investors, whether in the form of fiscal or non-fiscal incentives. Institutions were highlighted by our speakers. Mayor Trenes highlighted the creation of the Heritage Conservation Council of Iloilo as an institution that actually provide incentives that shape the behavior of the owners of heritage houses, of buildings, heritage structures in the city. And even in the case of the cities that were mentioned in the ranking presented by Mr. David during the first presentation, the provision of all these other elements that would make the destination resilient, infrastructure, what else, sanitation, security, order, they all depend on the nature of institutions that we create. So if you want to shape behavior of people towards development, towards a trajectory towards growth and sustainable development, we need these institutions to create those incentives. Now, the next is P. And for P, I think I'd like to mention two Ps. The first is policies. And policies are very crucial because they set the direction. You may have an institutional arrangement. You may have a council for heritage preservation, for promoting, let's say, gross national happiness and the like. But if it's not articulated in a policy that we can articulate, that we could verbalize, that we could speak in our own language, that we could assimilate and live with, then those institutions will not really matter. Now, the other P is people, and this is very much emphasized. Development should be for the people and by the people. Building a heritage structure actually is a way of giving back to the people by creating jobs through the investments. And that was the emphasis in the second panel on urban renewal. It's okay to preserve, it's fine to preserve all these structures because the ultimate objective is not really to preserve that building per se for all its aesthetics and beauty, but it's really to generate the investments in order to provide jobs. And again, eventually lead to a level of national happiness, which is actually a measure beyond what we usually use, which is the gross domestic product. Okay, it doesn't measure, our really improvements in overall standards of living. Then the last is S. In S, and this is where each one of us actually plays a very crucial role, S can stand for systems. Systems are interconnected networks, and each one of us here is part of that network. I'm sure you're familiar with telecommunications network, internet the network. In the network, there are various nodes. Okay? The nodes sometimes may malfunction, but overall, if the nodes are very strong, because we share best practices, we share knowledge. As students, you share your research, faculty members share research. We in the industry, we share research and knowledge. Over time, we could actually make development more sustainable, because that is how actually civilizations prospered across time, right? When knowledge was actually shared. And that is how the second economic revolution came about. The economic revolution where we saw the marriage of science and technology. So the knowledge was not just kept anymore in shelves of classrooms, but they were actually eventually distributed and shared to people. And that is how we could actually be able to contribute to the next generation. In our case, our children's children. In your case, for the young people here, when you get married, your children and grandchildren in the future. And that's where the Tourism Knowledge Center actually comes in, to help build these networks of students, faculty, researchers, and industry practitioners, so that we could actually work together in order to achieve the last S, which is the standard. Because sustainable tourism is a standard in itself. So if we make sustainable tourism the standard, the benchmark in everything we do, then it is not going to be a very elusive concept anymore. So sustainable tourism is more of transferring to the next generation what we actually are able to enjoy today. So we hope that the Tourism Knowledge Center will be able to contribute more and more to this to this development and upholding of the standards. So with that, I'd like to end. So that's the synthesis of the presentations that we actually all enjoyed today. Thank you.